Hello and good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. My name is Darren and I'll be anchoring the session this afternoon. I'd like to introduce you to our host, Craig.
Hello there, my name's Craig Smith. Nice to meet you all.
And I'd also like to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Pete Mack.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Craig and Pete. Just before we start, I'd like to start off with some housekeeping. As you'll notice, we are actually using an online panel today. Now, on screen, you should be able to see two large red arrows. If you click the large red arrow on your screen, this will either reduce the panel or increase the size of the panel. This allows you to type questions in and also to raise your hand if there are any issues. If you can't see the panel right now, it's probably because it's actually minimized at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the session, we'd really like you to interact with us, and there will be a couple of polls, there will be a couple of questions we really want to ask you. So please get your buttons at the ready when we actually put the polling time on the screen. At the end of the session, we'd like to invite you to complete a very quick survey. We'd love to get your thoughts. And we'll also be providing you with a full recorded session after today. So please now put down your pens and enjoy the session, enjoy the webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Craig.
Hi there, everyone. Okay, so as we said on the invite that we sent to you, thank you for joining us. We're going to be looking at a few issues today. I think many of you work in organizations or with organizations that use engagement surveys. So we're going to quickly look at why do we use them in the first place. We're going to look at how businesses typically respond when they get the results of their employee survey. We're going to look at some examples of organizations that have taken a slightly different approach to their employee surveys, which we hope you find interesting. And we're going to finally conclude with, well, what can we do differently? How can we break the cycle of surveys and response that we find in many organizations? First of all, though, we're going to start with a bit of a poll. I'm just going to give you back to Darren temporarily, and Darren's going to run a little poll for us.
Okay, Craig, thank you. Time for that first poll. So get ready to vote if you would. How long have people been measuring engagement? Give you a few seconds to answer that question. Is it 10 years? Is it 100 years? Is it 1,000 years? Or is it even longer than that? I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, some interesting results coming through. Craig, have we got those results?
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results with you. So there we go. Last 10 years, 19%, 100 years, 44%, 1,000 years, 13%, or longer than that, 25%. So, well, how long have we been measuring it? Well, I guess, we're sort of going back to, sorry, I'm going to hide the results there for you. Going back, whether they call them employee engagement surveys back then, Alexander the Great, well known for walking through his troops before battle, talking to them, then through as we move through sort of military history into the sort of 1980s, 1990s, with the book Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman wrote, First Break All the Rules, where really we started to get some traction around this idea that maybe we can start to find out how people feel in our organizations, and perhaps it matters. And nowadays, we've got organizations all over the world, Gallup, Connexa, OCI. It's a multi-million-dollar business measuring and carrying out surveys for organizations to find out how their people are thinking. So we've really got good at the measurement side of things, but one of the challenges that we have is actually, is it really making a difference? The latest survey, which if you've not seen, if you're interested in this type of thing, I thoroughly recommend if you go to Google and put Gallup Employee Engagement Survey 2013, really great piece of work, basically found that 30% of people, only 30% of people are actually engaged in their work, and that actually about 7 in 10 are actively looking to go and work somewhere else. So that disengaged with their work. Well, again, measuring it just for the sake of it, why bother? Well, there's been a lot of research done into the difference that having an engaged workforce makes. I guess intuitively we just know that it makes good sense, business sense. But some work done by Bob Nelson, who's an employment and motivational guru in the States, looked at 100 best places to work in America. And on average, he found 233% higher financial return for organizations that had good cultures where people were engaged, motivated, and wanted to do the best they could for the organization. So fundamentally, for us, it boils down to the fact that we are really good at measuring this stuff. We've got this massive infrastructure set up to do it. The problem is what do we do with the results once we've got them? And this is really for us where the rubber hits the road. It's where we really do have the opportunity to make a difference. But do we make that difference? Now, I'm going to ask Darran to run another little quick survey for us, just to ask us this question here.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Again, survey time. Quick poll. What do you think is the most common response to survey results? Okay, give you a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we've got the results coming in. Great.
Okie dokie. So there's just a few more coming in. Right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. So actually, it's a bit of a mischievous question, this, because actually a lot of organizations do all of these things. We've seen our clients and some of the clients that we've worked with in the past tend to do all of these different things. And the last one there was a little bit mischievous, but I've worked in organizations where actually we seem to spend more time arguing whether the questions were phrased right, actually, than really doing anything serious with the results. So yeah, the typical responses are we focus on the bad stuff. Yeah, we have red, amber, green in a lot of these surveys. We look for the reds. We chase after them. We really sort of home in on where our biggest gaps are. We set up a project team to go and work on the engagement project. We may even give it a brand name, a sexy project title to sort of get everybody excited about it, project engagement or project capability. And we set targets for all of our managers. We set KPIs and we give them PDR objectives to go after these elusive engagement figures that we want them to get, which is all good stuff. But the typical responses that we get from that we see this time and time again, cynicism amongst organizations, particularly amongst the employees who are being constantly measured by these surveys, to say, well, it's only every 2 years or every year when we run these surveys that our managers seem to be interested in engagement. That's the only time they want to talk to us about it. And, here we go again, lots of activity, flurry of activity, and they'll forget all about it again in a couple of months' time. We also see that, as with any measure like this, that it's a lagging indicator. It may tell us how engaged our people were 6-12 months ago, but it doesn't really tell us how engaged they are now. And the problem that we have is that maybe we should be looking forward rather than backwards when it comes to employee engagement. We also go for the big win. We look for the big low-hanging fruit and we go after that. But a lot of the time with these types of projects, or a lot of the time with these types of surveys, there are some smaller things that maybe just didn't show up as strongly in the survey, but are actually really important to our teams and could possibly, left unattended, be a source of dissatisfaction in the future. So what does this all mean? Well, sorry, I've just realized I'm still showing the poll results there. Apologies. What are we sort of talking about here then? Just going back to what we've just been talking about there, this idea that engagement's just a once in a blue moon thing that we do every now and again. The fact that we're sort of looking backwards a lot of the time rather than forwards, and we only go for the low-hanging fruit. This was summed up quite nicely for us by one of our associates, a guy who works for Deloitte called Darran Hill, who's one of our LinkedIn group, and we were asking some questions about this whole thing about employee surveys, and these were some of the comments that he came up with. Is, does this sound familiar to you? We tend to create a world-class survey. We have focus groups. We have a fantastic plan. We get management buy-in. We communicate it. We do it again next year. We go round. We rinse and repeat. And he says, we've seen this all before, right, in our organisations. And his mindset was, bear in mind, this guy works for Deloitte. He's not a consultant. He's not a management culture consultant. He's talking about, we need to move from engaged employees to engaged environments. We need to move from the philosophy of just surveying people to telling stories and having conversations. And we need to move away from this point in time to a continuous feedback process where it's not just a one-off every 1 or 2 years. We do it all the time. It's part of our business processes. And his analogy, which was very colourful, we will continue to visit the loo and come back with with a toilet roll stuck to the bottom of our shoe every time if we just keep doing the same stuff. So I'm going to hand you over to Peter now, who's got a nice story to tell us about an organisation that did things slightly differently. Pete.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I just wanted to touch very briefly on some of the dynamics that Craig's describing, and then maybe a different way of doing it through the vehicle of a case study. So, hey, I did a bit of overnight doodling, so I hope this works for all of you. You wouldn't believe I've got an arts A level to my name when you see this, but next slide is, so the conventional approach here is often that we have frontline people in a team there at the bottom of the slide, and they've got a few ideas. And once a year, or however often it is, they'll escalate those ideas up through the organisation to the, say, the senior management team sitting at the top of the organisation there around the board table. And what happens here is interesting. Often a lot of time gets consumed as people at the top of the organisation, might be the HR project team, might be the board, have a good think about all this feedback that's coming in. Big organisations, thousands of pieces of feedback. What are we going to do with it all? And often what happens is it's synthesized, turned into coherent streams of activity, coherent issues, and then those projects are initiated. So in an employee survey, a typical sort of project that might come off the back of it is the comms project. Okay, we need to do more around the intranet, we need to do more around newsletters, town halls, we might need a new piece of IT to get better at customer experience. And that all then comes back down the organisation on top of the team. So what it tends to be is issue-led projects that focus on the problems, which from a team point of view is a bit strange because it tends to run alongside business as usual rather than being integrated into it. And it tends to be the project teams that are responsible for execution. So what happens there dynamically in the organisation is that actually often it does feel like that's being done to us at a team level. And so the engagement doesn't end up being very engaging. That's the problem. A second dynamic here is on the right-hand side of that wonderful diagram of mine. What happens to the ideas that get rejected? Because in reality, if you've ever been on the receiving end of an employee survey, i.e. you've analysed it, you'll know some of the ideas that come out aren't that great. They're not going to be implemented in a million years. So what happens to the no's? How do we communicate back down to employees that their idea is a no? And what we often find is not doing that, not being able to close the loop, not being able to say no to employees, can be as disengaging as anything. So that's some of the challenges of this system. However, it's an entirely appropriate system for big step change projects. Nothing wrong with that. So what we call discontinuous improvement, a very appropriate mechanism for that. But we would argue it's an appropriate and a good system, but it's an insufficient system. So what I want to look at now through the vehicle of a case study of a company called Carver. Now, Carver, they are a global firm who make access control and security systems. They have a UK operation. The UK operation has been doing something a bit different through a system they call TakeON. Now, what they're all about is they're manufacturing and engineering. They make access control systems. They have 2 UK offices, and they have field teams of sales, engineers, and project managers whizzing around the country, installing and selling their stuff. And historically, they've had quite a legacy of silo working. Well, who hasn't, frankly? And they needed the whole company to engage in the business improvement projects they needed to make. So they needed to try something different. So another one of my snazzy illustrations to talk about what Carver did alongside the continuous improvement project. Now, they had the same dynamic of lots of people at the frontline level and a small team of senior managers above them. But what they focused on, and the person that I've now drawn and circled in red, they focused very much around the role of the team leader. What's the role of the team leader in driving ongoing engagement of the team? So they did a lot around upskilling team leaders to run conversations with their team. So the role of the senior team in this new system became the senior team decide what's strategically important and what the most important themes are for the teams to be talking about. So from the top table come a selection of themes. So for the next 3 months, we're going to talk about X, Y, Z. And at a team level, the team will then have an ongoing regular conversation, so a once a week, half-hour conversation around a particular theme to generate some ideas to improve it. So if we just click on, I'll show you some of the themes that Carver needed to talk about. So they felt, in line with their strategy, what they needed to be talking about, and this was over a 6-month time period that you're looking at here, is first of all, we need to get managers better at how do they connect people to the strategy? How do they have courageous conversations? How do they manage change? There were some areas that I identified they needed to get managers being better at. And then once those managers were upskilled, launching conversations at a team leader level about subjects like understanding our business, how do we hit our target, and how do we be future focused in our business. So there's a 6 months of conversations that Carver wanted to have. So what happened there? What was the result of that? What was the dynamic in the Carver system? Well, what happened is that they really focused on let's make the team leaders and let's make the functional teams responsible for implementing improvements locally. So ideas don't go up the tree to the board anymore. Ideas get dealt with at a local level. So number of ideas will be generated around a theme, say connecting people with strategy. They try some ideas out. Some of those ideas get rejected, but the people that are doing the rejecting are the team members themselves. They realise that their idea isn't going to work, they bin it. There's no disengagement in that process, because it's them deciding it. Equally, they implement some other ideas. And then the next thing they do is they share those ideas broadly across the organisation through a platform they call the Internet, a social platform, so that other teams get the benefit of their learnings, their ideas. And those ideas also go all the way up to the top table, all the way to the board. So very different process, and this is a process which is done by employees themselves. Hundreds of ideas get implemented and shared across the business, and this is what we call slightly different generative improvement. It's an ongoing process of generative performance improvement. So what impacts has that made on their performance? What I'm showing here is that the two systems work side by side. We're not suggesting that one is better than the other, we're just suggesting that most organisations need both to work together, both discontinuous improvement and generative. So for Carver, what they had, well, first of all those lovely ideas, hundreds of ideas being implemented each year. What that did for them is that drove an increase in their headline engagement score, as measured by their annual employee survey, of 22% up year on year. And it contributed to the four best performing years in their company history. I just want to delve into that employee engagement score in a little bit more detail. So there's some of the survey questions here from their survey and the results that they've got on them. So what we've got here, 4 questions that we could argue are directly related to themes that they've been talking about. So if they've been talking about strategy, performance, how we make a contribution to performance, how we hit our targets, it's pretty understandable how the score of question number 3 there, I know what's required for our team to be successful, would go up by 28%. And why the score at the bottom there, my manager provides opportunities to discuss how we can improve what we're doing, goes up by 38%. By the way, stunning scores, very impressive. But the next bit is interesting. So I put some other questions up there, which really don't have anything to do with the specific conversation that they were having, but are very relevant to the whole concept of employee engagement. Now, in my experience, these are often some of the scores that are the hardest to move. So people's perception of their managers setting a good example, whether their manager helps them with their development, and whether the place of work brings out the best in them. These scores are going up stronger than some of the other scores that are more specifically related to the direct conversations they have. Right at the bottom there, I feel a sense of belonging within this team. Incredibly important to an employee, incredibly important to their sense of connection and engagement to the company they work with. And what we say here is this is all coming out about as an outcome of having conversations about what matters most. So it's this idea that we have of engagement isn't an input, it shouldn't be a project, it should be an ongoing conversation, and engagement will be an output of that. Final word on Carver, he can't be here, but it should go to Steve Buick, who's the Managing Director of Carver. A couple of quotes that he put in there around what this did for them. Steve's perspective is really, what's this enabled him to do? This system has got every employee in the organisation having the same conversation at the same time about what matters most. So what we have now is real dialogue across the whole business about what matters most. And what's good for him and his senior team, they're very aware of, is problems and issues are being solved by the people who could deal with them at the right time, at the right level of the organisation. And this has contributed to the 4 best years of performance. So he sees it as is an accelerator of performance. They got to a level of performance over the past 4 years that might otherwise have taken them 10 years to get to. So nice little case study there of what this system can do, continuous improvement and generative improvement working hand in hand. So fire back to Craig for you to talk about the summary.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Peter. So I guess, yeah, we really, I mean, just to summarize, we said a 20-minute webinar with some questions. So in a minute, we're going to ask you if you can maybe generate some, or if you have any questions, hopefully coming out of today's discussion, if you'd like to just post those in the little question box that you've got. But really, just in summary, covering off what we've talked about, that you know, one of the things we strongly advocate that you can start thinking about doing is how do we switch from this, you know, how do we switch towards focusing on what matters most all at the same time? How do we get our employees, our teams all on the same page so that they are thinking and talking about the same issues at the same time? How do we get them actually involved in coming up with the solutions themselves? I think Peter's graphic earlier of, you know, this sort of constant batting ideas backwards and forwards between the teams who've been surveyed, their ideas, and the management team is a recipe for just additional workload, which people just can't cope with at the moment. They're too busy. So giving people the chance to actually just get involved, roll their sleeves up, find out what's going to work and test them themselves, and not having to have their managers give permission or sanction, I think is a really important point. And finally, building engagement into your routines, your working routines, not making it this, you know, once a year, once every 2 year thing that we only talk about when it's on our radar, but making engagement and finding out how our employees can improve our business, a daily, weekly, monthly routine that we all talk about and can all get their commitment into. So that's a little bit about what we wanted to get across to you. It's basically all about getting your people involved. So I'm going to hand you back over to Darran now, who's going to administer just the end of the webinar for us.
Okay, Craig, thank you. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Craig. And most importantly, thank you, everyone, for listening today. We really appreciate your time. What we'd like to do is we'd like to hang around now for 10 minutes or so. If you've got time, we'd really encourage you to do so as well. We've already got a couple of questions come through. I can see we've got some more questions being typed as we speak. So can I encourage everyone, if you've got a question right now, whether it was something that's come out of the webinar or something you'd really like to ask both Craig and Pete, please type away and we'll look at some of those. Just whilst you're doing that, there's been some great insights around, you know, how we turn employee engagement from a one-off project, really, something that happens once a year, into ongoing dialogue and get the whole organisation involved and engaged on an ongoing basis. What we would like to offer you is a free tool, the Business Connection Pulse Check tool, that will enable you to start that process off. And what we will do is we will forward that after this webinar via email to you, and we'll also be forwarded on a recorded version of the webinar too. Just after the survey, just after the webinar, we would ask you to complete the survey. We really want to know what you think about the survey. There's 3 questions there. We'd love to get your responses on those, and that really helps us to identify what's going to be of interest for future surveys too. We'd encourage you as well to share the recording with your colleagues, with your friends, anyone you feel that you know, may be interested in the survey. So please, you know, please feel free to do that when we send that through. So can I now ask for questions? You know, has anyone got any questions they want to ask? I can see here we've got. Oh, that's a great question. Great question. So what's the difference between what you're talking about and a suggestion box? Craig and Pete.
Okay, Pete, do you want to cover that one off? That's a great question. You know, the old stick it in the suggestion box, set up the suggestion box idea. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing wrong with suggestion boxes. I've seen some good ones in my time. I think it's down to a similar dynamic to the employee survey, as suggestion boxes don't tend to exist in organisations as ongoing mechanisms. for getting employee feedback. That's one of the challenges of it. So it's a challenge of time. So what we've been talking about here is this is a system, take the car for example, which they've locked in, so week in, week out, people having conversations about what matters most. So it's always there. That just establishes a culture where we are constantly talking about how we can improve rather than a one-off. For anyone who's ever emptied a suggestion box out, the other problem is that suggestion boxes are very, very focused on issues. They also become very, very difficult actually to interpret. You might find that a lot of things that go into a suggestion box are about pay, about benefits, about IT, about the fact we all need iPads, about the things that the company needs to do for me. Nothing wrong with that actually, if there's a real big problem in the company that needs to be resolved. But I would argue it's a little bit insufficient as an ongoing dynamic, and it's healthier to put something in place where we are actually in genuine dialogue about what people really mean. So if I see something in the suggestion box saying I haven't got the tools I need to do the job, and I'm a manager, that presents me with a real problem. Who's talking about it? Which tools are we talking about? What needs to be done? How much is it going to cost? All these things can be aired more constructively through dialogue. So yes, good place for suggestion boxes, but I would argue a better place for an ongoing conversation. And if organisations want to be mature, I think that's a dynamic we need to get to. It isn't about them and us, it's about doing everything we can do to break that dynamic of complaints raised to management and the expectation that nothing will be done with them, and getting to a place where we can get into a real conversation together. Hope that's helpful.
I mean, just to back that up, Pete, I totally agree with you, and I basically share your thoughts on that. I think one of the things that I always remember from my days when we used to have CI schemes, we used to call them continuous improvement schemes, with this question sort of suggestion box idea, was the fact that again, echoing what you've just said, a lot of the ideas would be very tangible, physical things. It would be, could we have maybe a different menu in the canteen? Could we have a different way of accessing our lockers in the changing rooms? Those sorts of things. Very rarely would people put forward suggestions about improving processes or improving systems or doing something about the culture of the organizations. There were usually very hard ideas rather than what I would call softer ideas. And I think, that for me was a fundamental deficiency. People would often, as you say, look for what our managers can do to improve our physical environment rather than what we need to do collectively to improve our culture within our organization. So it was very much about, reinforcing the whole message of this webinar, which is, the them and us thing. Totally agree with that, Pete. We've got one question here from Melinda, which is just a very practical question. Can we get a copy of the deck? We will send out a recording of the webinar. But the deck we aren't going to actually, the slides show that is, we're not going to actually distribute. So you will get a video recording as a follow-up, and you can again watch that again if you want to, or you can share that with any of your colleagues. I think Darren's got another couple of questions. We've probably got time for one more question.
I think we've got time for one more question, Craig. Thank you. Again, a great question from John. John's asking the question, what do you, I think it was yourself, Pete, that mentioned this. What do you mean by routines in a business? When you talk about key routines, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Dan, if I wasn't clear on that. So every organisation has a cadence of meetings. Some have less time for these than others. The trick here with generative improvement is in terms of introducing conversations to the existing cycle of meetings and routines. So take an example of a type of business that's very fast-paced, has very little time for meetings. Retail, take your supermarket retail setup. Now, they do not sit around with 100 people who run the shop floor of a supermarket for an hour every week having a nice team meeting. What they do is they will have a 10-minute huddle before the start of opening, probably behind the checkout, run by the store manager. So that is a key routine. That is the key opportunity that leaders have to drive conversations through that organisation around what matters most. So the idea here is to integrate these generative improvement take-on conversations with that existing set of routines that are already there. So take your meeting routines, ideally your weekly ones, and run these conversations in that context rather than adding them over and above as a separate project. Hope that answers it.
I think that's a great way of summarising that, Pete. I've got nothing to add to that. So Excellent. So I'm going to hand over to Darran because we're literally on the money, and we promised a half-hour webinar, and that's what we want to deliver. So Darran, over to you just to finish off, please.
We're absolutely on the money, Craig. Thank you. So what I'd like to encourage people to do as well, if you'd like more information about TakeON and about what we've talked about, then please visit our website at takeon.biz. Alternatively, you might want to get involved in the conversations we're having on LinkedIn. Some fantastic conversations going on there right now. So please join us on LinkedIn if you'd like to do so. Finally, again, once again, I'd like to thank Pete and Craig, but more importantly, everyone else for listening today. We hope you found it useful. We hope you found it interesting. We hope you found it engaging. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.